The past 13 weeks, we've been taking a look in a sermon series that I've titled Behind the Scenes in the Life of Jesus Christ. And today culminates everything that we've been talking about. We've looked at the temptation, we looked at his baptism, we looked at the Sermon on the Mount, we've looked at the last week for the past 6 or 7 weeks, the last week of his life, we've looked at the crucifixion. But it's today that changes everything. The rest of his life matters not if the resurrection doesn't happen. Okay? You see, at this point, we're going to dive a little bit behind the scenes here. We will need to understand that the ladies who were at the cross, that all of the disciples at this point think it's game over. You know, you're playing a video game and then you die and the game's over. You lost all your progress and everything that you lived and worked for is done. But 3 days later, the ladies were going to the tomb on that bright, sunshiny morning. They had spices and aloes and myrrhs and stuff with them. They were going to go and anoint his body again. But lo and behold, when they got there, the stone had been rolled away from the tomb. The guards were on the ground, whether they were unconscious or passed out or what be the case. And there were angels there. And they come and say, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead?" Mary Magdalene is who it says it was, runs back to Peter and the disciples. And Peter and John make headlong way for the tomb. They run as fast as they could. Peter beat John there, but once they got inside, Peter stopped at the door. And John went in. John was there at the crucifixion, remember? John walks in and finds the grave clothes laying there. When we see pictures of the tomb on resurrection morning, we typically see that the grave clothes are all over the place. They're strewn all over the place. And sometimes the headscarf is there, sometimes it's not. But the Gospel of John, eyewitness testimony, remember, the Gospel of John says that he walked in and that the grave clothes were exactly like Jesus had just disappeared. His body was laying there. The shroud was untouched. You see, back in those days, there were grave robbers. There were people who would literally rob the graves of those who had been died and buried. But you see, they wouldn't just leave the cloths behind because those linens are very expensive, worth a lot of money. They wouldn't just leave those linens behind. It was just like he disappeared. You see, Jesus had what we called a translated body. He'd been resurrected. You see, that translated body has the ability, I can reach out and touch Jesus just like I would shake her hand. Thomas even put his finger in his side. Jesus could eat, but he didn't have to. He also had the ability to just appear in a room. He could walk through walls. You see, the resurrection changes everything. The resurrection changes everything. Everything that happened up until this point was all for nothing if he didn't rise from the dead. But he did. And now Jesus sits on the throne. And today is not a sermon. Today is a transition where we go from behind the scenes in the life of Christ to our next sermon series. We're going to go through the book of Hebrews. Next slide, Dave. We're going to go behind the scenes of the book of Hebrews. I've titled this sermon series, Holy, Holy, as in whole, H-O-L-E, H-O-L-Y. Holy, holy, lukewarm no more. This book of Hebrews is all about the matchless Christ. Have you ever wondered how Jesus is the perfect sacrifice? Have you ever wondered how all of this fits with the Old Testament? Hebrews is your book. Hebrews explains how Jesus is the perfect sacrifice. And in the book of Hebrews, popular theory is that it's written by Paul. I don't believe, scholars don't believe, we don't believe it's written by Paul. It's either Barnabas or Apollos. I believe it's a Barnabas. There's a good case, there's a really good case for either Barnabas or Apollos. I can make a case either direction. But the writer of Hebrews, interspersed in amongst all of this holiness, the book of Hebrews is all about holiness. And interspersed among this holy kind of talk about Jesus, the writer of Hebrews gives 5 very stern warnings. Not to be apathetic. Not to be lukewarm. I chose this photograph for the sermon series for this reason. You see, the first reason is the deep pool. This is a hot spring. And you can see that this hot spring, it goes down quite a ways. You see, in the book of Hebrews, we're going deep. We're not just going to skim the surface of this thing. We're going to go down deep. We're going to understand why Jesus is the perfect Christ, why he is the perfect sacrifice, why he is matchless and absolutely unmatched throughout everything in history. Not only because of the deep pool, but look at the steam rising from that pool. It's obviously cold around, and the steam is rising up. You see, the steam because we need to be on fire for Jesus Christ. You see, in a world that is absolutely frigid against God, we cannot afford to only be lukewarm. Because lukewarm is going to do nobody any good. So we're going to go deep. We're going to go digging and looking into the book of Hebrews. The theme of Hebrews is all about holiness. Not just in Jesus, but in you and me as well. Because Jesus is that perfect sacrifice. Jesus is the Sabbath rest. Jesus is the great high priest. And on this resurrection morning, my prayer is that this changes everything for you. We can believe God exists all day long. But if we don't believe that he rose from the dead, it's all for nothing. There is a lot of tangible proof for the resurrection. I'm guaranteeing you, I've seen the evidence in Scripture. It's there. This really, he didn't just swoon on the cross. He didn't pass out. The man was dead. And yet now he's alive. His body didn't see decay. My prayer is that that changes you. We're going to sing an invitation hymn this morning. And this invitation hymn describes everything about resurrection morning. We're going to sing Victory in Jesus. Why? Because we have the ultimate victory in a victory over death.